Thanks for joining us online, everyone, on this beautiful summer afternoon. Um, and just so everyone knows, we are recording this, so people who can't make it today will have a chance to uh, to to hear about this study that Whitney's going to present on. I'll just remind everyone just at the start here to stay on mute, and we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So that would be a time to come off mute and ask questions. We can also take questions in the chat box as well if something comes up during the course of the presentation that you'd like to hear more about or get some clarity on. So just and we'll wrap this up around at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock. So that's the goal for today. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Max Yortzberg. I'm the Conservation Director with Park County Environmental Council. PCEC, we're your local community advocacy organization working to protect the lands, water, wildlife, and people of Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. So I'm really happy to kick us off this community conversation today, talking about Yellowstone River recreational use study that has been going on for a few years now. I would say back in 2017, PCEC, along with the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group and freshwater partners and others in the area, we convened what was called the Yellowstone River Symposium. We did that after the fish kill in 2016 when the alarm bells were going off and we needed to get together and discuss the state of the river and the future of the river. And throughout that 2-day symposium, many issues came up, but two issues rose to the top. One was extreme drought conditions and persistent drought and climate change and the effects that it's going to have on the Yellowstone River. And the other was just simply our use, people on the river, recreational use, whether it's just a fun float or a fishing trip, people were seeing growing numbers of people on the river and it was raising some concerns. So the watershed group and others decided that, well, we need to get a better understanding of this. We've seen conflicts on other rivers, like over the Madison, due to crowding and use, and we don't really know what crowded is. So let's find out. Let's start counting numbers and talking to people and doing this river use study. So that kind of kicked it off. That was 2019, and then as you know, we jumped right into the COVID years, and then we had a massive flood. So it was a pretty challenging time to do a study on river use because the river in this area was going through quite a few interesting times of its own. But I think that all really kind of helped inform the study in many ways, and we'll be hearing more about that. And we've been seeing an increase in river use, just like we've been seeing an increase in everything around here. More people moving here, more people visiting here. People are moving here, they're coming here because of things like the river, right? The Yellowstone is a fantastic resource that runs right through our backyard. And I can't blame people for wanting to come spend some time on it. It's a world-class fly fishing destination. People travel from all over to do that. And on a hot summer day, there's no better place to be than to jump in the river. And, as a result, everyone I know, everyone in this area, we love the river. We're passionate about it. We care for it. We spend a lot of time and energy working for it on its behalf. We do cleanups, we collect data like this. We monitor its quality. So we're so, how would you say, we're so passionate about it that, it tends to drive us in many different ways. We tend to embellish a lot. We give it a lot of characteristics. We feed off of it, and to the point where we mythologize it. It's got a mythic quality in it, and rightly so. But we're always guests on the river. We're visiting it, and so it's our responsibility to be responsible for it. And I think this study is a step in that direction, a step in our acknowledging that we have a responsibility, and we need to start somewhere. And we can't just work off of the stories and the myth. We need the empirical data which, I know isn't that sexy, but it's necessary for us to have a sound and informed discussion. And when what comes time, if and when we need to make some serious decisions about, how we interact and how we visit that river, this data was going to help it out, help that discussion. So that's what this study is for in many ways. It's been a collective effort, led by the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group, especially, and all of our other local nonprofit partners, agencies, and volunteers who've worked on this the entire time. It's really a collaborative effort, but there's been one person who's kind of led the charge and been up in front of it, and that's Whitney Tilt, who's here with us today to present on the study and on all the data. So let me give you all a quick introduction to Whitney, and then I'll turn it over to him to give us a nice background, and then also to talk about some of the recommendations for what we do next after 4 years of collecting data. So Whitney has spent a career working in fisheries and wildlife conservation, private lands management, and addressing a wide range of challenges from the Colorado River allocations and black-footed ferret recovery to Asian tiger conservation and the evaluation of federal fisheries programs. Whitney earned a master's from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and began his introduction to the Greater Yellowstone region, ranching in the Tetons of Idaho. In addition to authoring the book Flora of the Yellowstone, he is a founder of High Country Alps, developing interactive field guides for smartphones and tablets, and is a partner at Conservation Benchmarks. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Whitney and let him get started. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Max, and to PCEC for providing this forum. I know many of you on this call have tuned in earlier and been active parts of this study. And this study could not have existed without the support of the community and the feedback, and most importantly, experience and knowledge. So with hopes that the technology works, we'll share the screen, and I'm going to go off this PowerPoint and just check one thing to get the magic pointer going there. Max, I'm assuming it's on screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. Well, lo and behold, we're here to talk about the study. And as soon as I can get the slides to actually move. So the study started in 2020 and went for 3 years of data collection. We're now in our 4th year. It has 4 major goals. One is to establish a baseline of recreational use, a little bit of what Max said, how many people are going on the river, when and how. To measure the capacity of the fish access sites, to survey river users and landowners on their feelings and attitudes towards the river and its recreational use. And then lastly, and really where we're at now, is to, through ongoing outreach and all, develop what does all this data mean? Where do we go from here? The first one is develop levels of use. You'll see a lot of data presentation here. I don't expect you will not be tested on it. There is no quiz at the end of this. But in the way we developed levels of use was we had 8 cameras up and down the river in reaches between the fish access sites with boat ramps. And we took time-lapse photos every 6 to 20 seconds, depending on how quickly the water moved and the scope of the river itself. You see here one example. And it's really important to know that someone on this presentation might be able to recognize who those people are, but we didn't. We reduced that photo to data. So we know the date, the time, the location. We see We dropped it into drift boats and rafts. There's 1, personal watercraft 2, and individuals 6. Then in addition, we were collecting river flow data, water temperature data, weather. And so all that data is fairly rich. The cameras even told us how hot it was, which is what the forecaster, the weather forecaster, would probably have said it was 80 degrees that day. But if you're sitting in the sun like the camera was, and these people are, it felt pretty much like 100 degrees. So that's the kind of data that was collected. And then it was reduced by kind of a torturous hand counting 2 data sets. The images themselves are considered confidential and privileged. They will not be released and will be archived until the study is over. But we were very serious about maintaining the privacy of any individuals who were captured. As I want to say, we don't care who you were on the river with and why. So starting to use that data, we can show, in this case, we're showing the average number of people, weekends versus weekdays, the weekends being the solid bars, the weekends, the other way around, weekdays being the striped or open bars, and the weekends being the solid bars. And in this case, we're going downstream from McConnell on the left down to Carter's Bridge. And each of those columns is by month. So unto itself, the data doesn't tell you much, but for instance, you can see, we had days in July when the waters, where the commercial rafting is the most active, where we had over 780 people a day coming down that one stretch between McConnell and Cinnabar. You can see heavier use during the weekends than weekdays. So this is just one example of kind of how this data can then be begin to be analyzed. This is another example. This is one single stretch, in this case between Loch Laven and Mallard's Rest in 2021. Across the river season, the black line is total number of vessels, and then the 2 lines are personal watercraft, the light blue, and the drift boats and rafts. Now, what's interesting here is you see the bouncing up and down. And that is because you have weekends and weekdays, you have nice days, and you have lousy days. So if you look at July 4th or July 3rd, it was clear, calm winds, becoming breezy, off-color water, but overall, everybody anxious to start the water season. So you have high use. But then on July 7th, you have a wave drop down. This is a Wednesday, and it was warm and sunny, but you had becoming breezy, threatening rain, and off-color water, probably a Lamar contribution of mud or whatnot. So you see it was weekend, less desirable water conditions. So that's what kind of can help drive this. So we have all these characteristics of use all being collected. And of course, the big challenge is how the heck do you cat herd those into something that's establishing base use. And for that, we are still analyzing data, and hand counting is extremely arduous. And we're still waiting for machine learning, AI machine learning, to really help drive what is basically 2,700 images per camera per day down into the ones that actually show use. So working with MSU's Cooperative Fisheries Research Unit to really house this data and collate it together. And these graphs that you were seeing here are indicative of the kind of data that can be driven from that data representation that can be driven from the data itself. And I'm going to keep zooming and then remembering that we're going to have a chance to, as a group, go back and look at any of this. So this is another way to look at the data. Consider this a heat map. The warmer the color, the higher the use. In this case, it's going from the upper, taking representative sites down the river from upper river to lower river. And this is dates from September at the top all the way down to June. And you can see these hot days of use. And you could go into each of these days and you could fairly quickly explain why they were hot or why they were lower use using these various parameters. So all of this is this very rich data set that we've developed. The next piece of it was how well do the access sites do their job? And Yellowstone River, really from Gardner to Livingston, has tremendous access overall, either by day use sites without ramps and sites that do have ramps. This is a data amalgamation of every fish access site that we counted. And this is where volunteers were extremely helpful for my sanity. But basically, we would start at McConnell, just downstream of Gardner, and we would count all the vehicles and trailers in each of the fish access sites with ramps down to Carter's Bridge. It took about 2 hours, 60 miles, but you get a snapshot of how many vehicles and trailers are in each of these sites. Now, very important that we counted vehicles and trailers, because any of you who are river users know it's very different whether or not you're just driving your personal vehicle down to the river to, say, wade fish or goof off, versus you're carrying a raft or something behind you. Launching, parking, all have a different aspect when you're trailering. So we counted both. And from this, we also gathered information on how well is the site handling the use. And that will be a major part of what we examine. And this is what we call a traffic light summary of that. When do the wheels start to come off the bus? So on something like McConnell, it generally handles all the use that's demanded of it. And it starts to get pretty heavy use, probably just about now as the salmon flies start to come out. And then we have detailed description of what its pluses and minuses are. Right now, it's, for instance, got a rough access road. Overflow parking goes up the shoulders. And then we look at the Forest Service having requesting to improve that site. Then the next one down is Brogan's. It would have been pretty much a green or a yellow until June of 2022, when it was wiped from the map. And at this point, it is a totally vacant site that will probably be officially closed by FWP pretty soon. Major blow to the commercial rafting. Then we go through like Yankee Jim and Carbella that generally handle demand. But then we get, for instance, to mile 26, an informal site that has now been, planned for FWP to create a day use site there. They've been working with the neighbors and all to develop that site. It was damaged during the flood, but that's one that's the longest, kind of the most needed, because it's filling in on a 12-mile stretch. Then Immigrant and Carter's Bridge. All of you who know the river know how much fun it can be to find parking there, and we have actually people being forced to, or by choice because they're trailering, going across the bridge and parking across from these fish access sites, and then walking back across a bridge that has no pedestrian pathways. So this, again, is just a sample of this stoplight analysis where we're kind of examining how well these sites serve you as the public river user. Then we did surveys. How did people enjoy the river? What did they like and dislike, etc. On the left, you have what was satisfactory about your own river experience, and this is just one small piece of the survey, which the first one sampled about 1,200 people, and then we did a smaller, more concentrated one last year, and we had about 300 respondents. in part because of just the way how we could get people actually doing the survey. But they loved being on the water. They spent time with family and friends. They enjoyed relaxing, the natural surroundings, solitude. These are all reasons what was satisfactory. And the word unaided here is very important. We did not lead the witness. They filled in yes or no questions and all that. But when we asked this question, we didn't give them a list to choose from. These are ones they came up with themselves. So interesting enough, on the other side, what was unsatisfactory, most people said nothing was, they didn't respond. But 192 said nothing was bad. Then a few said it was too many people in the river, bad etiquette, obnoxious behavior. One complained they didn't catch fish. And others flipped the boat and got rained out, etc. But isn't it interesting, out of 1,200 people that, some, maybe that's 30 people actually found something to complain about. Now, since we're in the political season, you can point out that most politicians would love to have that favorable rating. So overall, without a doubt, hands down, people go to Yellowstone and they have a hell of a good time. But it's pointed out very importantly that a lot of this has to do with them getting on and off the river without a lot of delay and confusion, all of which comes out in the various aspects of this study. We also, because of what we had heard from landowners and all, we surveyed landowners, riparian landowners, asking them of what they thought about their recreational use. We pulled some 200 addresses from the cadastral. We sent out letters and emails and all to all of them. Of that, I believe it was 45 responded. And many of these were the larger property owners that, or people who are involved with the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group, so they were responsive to such a request. And first and foremost, that 46% responded that recreational use has impacted use and enjoyment of their property in some way. It should be pointed out that the reverse is true, that 54% were not impacted. But when asked to, their interactions with recreationists, many of them found them to be highly variable. Many were polite and all that, and others, the word clueless was mentioned, which should bring smiles to the faces of some of us who spend time on the river. But understanding, respectful, friendly, and a few actually had something that approached, hostile or whatnot, but very few. But it's important to recognize that many landowners, especially those that are larger properties that don't have a house sitting right where a river user might want to do something right in front of the pane glass window, but these more undeveloped sites, are suffering from certain levels of littering, using the property as a latrine, leaving gates open, having pets chasing stock, etc. Camping on the offshore islands, which are largely private, above the ordinary high water mark. All of these are things that were recorded. And as we go forward with really wanting a good relationship between the public users and the private landowners who share these shores, we want to make sure we concentrate on ways to improve that. So that is a really fast, high-level zoom of some of the data. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be a QR code, and that will lead you straight to the full study, which is still has the word draft on it. We're still accepting comments. We are proactively reaching out to many of the agencies and all, sitting down with them to ensure we have their input. The QR code will lead you to one that has benefited by a lot of that review. That is the most recent one. So all this data collection was great. You get to spend a lot of time on the river watching other people have fun while you're toying with cameras and keeping the elk from knocking them down. In one case, there was one, she appeared to be a barren cow. She did not have a calf with her, but she was going to protect that camera from my getting near it for most of a 2-month period. So it always made it quite fun to actually approach cameras. Instead of the elk moving away from you, she's standing her ground, curling her lip and stamping her foot. So great number of tales of learning and all as we went forward with this. And I really want to emphasize this has not ever been done this way before. In 2017 or 18, when FWP met with the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group, and the question of too much use or how is the state going to think about developing a management plan, they came back right away in that discussion and said, to have a management plan, you have to have some form of baseline data, and we have none. And that's where this study arose from. And as Max pointed out, it's really important. This is not some far-flung agency coming in to do a dispassionate gathering of data. This has been designed from the ground up by river guides and the like participating in this. And so these components have really never been put together in a way that most importantly can be easily replicated going forward. So we got all this data. What the heck are we going to do about it? And this is really where the most important part comes, because we really want to set up an action plan of tangible, actionable recommendations that we can follow through with. There might be some that fall in the BHAG, the big hairy ass ideas that are out there, to very concrete things that everybody on this call can participate in. So some of these are in the process of being developed, and I of course always go to Gary Larson for his great wisdom, and in this case it does come down to many people think their use is more holy than others, and our whole hope is that we can make sure that everybody gets what they want out of the river while protecting the river for the very reasons we want to be on it. So some of the recommendations in the outreach and education side of things, this one's kind of very high level, but we need to develop a proactive term plan on how do we ensure a continuing high quality recreational experience while preventing user conflict. And the report itself goes into at length into what user conflict kind of consists of, because for us going forward, having a background on what other people have learned about that. But it goes back to this very simple idea that many people on the river includes because they're residents, longtime residents of the area. It can be because they are elite athletes, elite fly fishermen. They feel often that they're the first to feel tweaked when, say, a novice who's never been to Montana is so excited about being on the river, gets in their way or does something they don't know any better. So these are the origins of potential user conflict we want to explore. One concrete example is to establish a river ambassador program, very much like the trail ambassador programs that are in the region. And for instance, the Joe Brooks chapter of Trout Unlimited is very interested in helping move that forward. But that's just one example of something that might be put on the table. And then when it's put on the table, it's like, okay, who's going to do it? What's it going to cost? When do we want to do it? And how do we maintain it? Those will be those 4 pieces that will always be in any of these items we move forward with. promoting greater respect and cooperation between the recreating public and the private landowner. And this goes both ways. And interesting enough, the report goes into quite a bit of detail about private landowners' attitudes. But when it comes to answering the question, how does the public recreating public feel about private landowners? Do we have instances like we have on neighboring rivers of landowners being aggressive against? We didn't record any. And interesting enough, when we're asking both FWP law enforcement and the sheriff's office to give us the general logs of complaints that might be filed, it's becoming very difficult to gain access to that information. At least it's been suggested that FWP may not even track such data, which I find amazing. But, in other words, we do want to ensure that that relationship works both ways, and we have some ideas to that effect. And then obviously a huge part of the outreach and education and having a quality experience is ensuring that, the river access sites live up to the demand. And where we say the community will make a decision they don't want to accommodate more demand, then making sure the recreating public understands where they can go. It's 60 miles of river. If you spread out, it becomes a pretty darn big river. And then of course, another one is to develop a river etiquette plan. That would be developed and implemented by many of the organizations on this call that have already been so active in this. But I do want to remind some people of an earlier campaign that was created by FWP and a citizens group, and then put forward by Brickhouse Creative here in Bozeman, and hopefully this will play. So many of you may remember that it was about 4 or 5 spots, but it obviously has some humor and short. But collectively, we need to make sure that folks know what they're supposed to do, both at the fish access sites. But now, when Granny Trout came out, we didn't have this thing called social media. So collectively, this has to be a very high priority for all of us to figure out. And hopefully, it's got to be collective. It can't be just one organization going one way and another going another way. It's only, if nothing else, because it's not sustainable. So that will be a big challenge for us. Moving on to the river access, and again, this is where the brick and mortar side of getting people onto the river and off the river. This is where push comes to shove. Once folks are on the river, the fly fishermen can eddy out and let the splash and giggle crowd go by. And there's a big river you can spread out and kind of do your own thing. But at the fish access sites, you're waiting to get on and off. Not to mention there are many that want to use the fish access site as their final destination to wade fish, swim, bird watch, etc. So some of the things that we've obviously done a lot of looking at the fish access sites, but to actually put down, on paper how we can, do exact improvements and what's needed. For those of you river users, obviously Mallard's Rest is a major one. We do, I believe, from my last conversation with FWP, the contract to do the work has been awarded. They have up to a month to mobilize. So there is some hope we may see the mallards reopen at least by the end of this river season. How best to address the loss of brogans. Cinnabar has been improved by the Forest Service, but that is a different fee structure, and whether or not they can handle all the commercial and recreation, personal traffic at that one site needs to be determined. And folks are working on it, both the Forest Service and FWP, and I know the commercial rafting companies. Develop a fish access site at mile 26. FWP does have the funding for that, so it's just a matter of moving it forward. Then obviously looking at evaluation options to increase the capacity and traffic flow at Immigrant and Carter's Bridge. And quite honestly, that probably comes down to a decision made by the public whether they want a fish access site or a park at these two, because they're two of the most treed and delightful spots, but they're not very effective at handling traffic flow. So, and then at other high use sites such as Point of Rocks and Loch Laven, look at ways of increasing capacity, developing a second hand launch site, and just other ways we reduce ramp crowding. FWP does plan to improve the ramp at Pine Creek and a couple of others. So some of this just comes down to communicating what's planned and what could be planned. And then things like encouraging the adoption of all these sites by all of us and not just relying on FWP, BLM, or the Forest Service to do our management for us. A big new player is the imposition of the conservation license. So all people who use a fish access site who do not have a hunting and fishing license are expected to have the conservation license, which is included in your hunting and fishing license if you have it. And presumably, if you go down with a group of 5 guests from out of state, they should be able to walk up to a sign, hit the QR code, and have the conservation license in their phone in a matter of seconds or minutes. That remains to be seen whether or not that system is up and running. So anyway, we also have partnering with everybody to do it. And as I've already mentioned, but we also have the study, for instance, was unable to count the number of commercial guides. We did count the number of anglers because we saw fishing rods and or active fishing. And we saw many who were commercial guides, either because we recognized the tags or we recognized who they were, but we could not reliably count them because the tags are not in one reliable place on the raft or the boat and large enough to be seen. So since we couldn't count them accurately, we did not count them. So that's been talked about with FOAM and MOGA and the Montana Board of Outfitters and FWP that if commercial, because obviously on the Madison and other places, commercial use versus personal use is a major bone of contention. So if that ever were really important, we do know that at this time of year, there are probably most people out there, there's a large number are anglers, but in August when the waters warm up and all, angling is a very small part of the daily use. All this we do have data on. So anyway, I want to kind of finish up here so that we can have discussion. We do have some public safety issues we need to recognize. It will come as a huge surprise to you, but Highway 89 can be a drag strip with high speed travel, passing both legally and illegally. And for instance, this sign is just that gray owl, which is one such straightaway. They have put high vis on these signs, but we really need to look at, when you start slowing down or speeding up coming out of a fish access site with a trailer, and you have high speed traffic coming up on you and RVs and all, should we be looking at ways to make this much more obvious? And yet we don't need any more sign pollution than we already have. So again, things that we as a community need to address. So anyway, all of these will be included in this. And again, I will encourage everybody to dig into the report and learn more about this. Obviously, we've got a bunch of great ideas out there already. Freshwater Partners and the Give Back to the Yellowstone that are involving so many of the folks on this phone. You know, we have a responsibility beyond our conservation licenses and all to be active in protecting the river. And because you're on this call, I bet you already know that. So people who aren't on this call that perhaps need to get to know that. Monitoring assessment will complete analysis of the 2023 data. It will be housed with MSU to help us create this database. We will be initiating macroinvertebrate monitoring this year. You know, basically just continuing to Max's point, take care of the water quality in the river itself. So really, in closing, I want to recognize the supporters who helped make this happen. This got no federal funding or anything. You know, local businesses, foundations, and I'm looking at the foundations, and I know he's on the call, so I'm going to make sure that I amend this to make sure that the Yellow Dog Community and Conservation Foundation is included on this. So bad on me for that. But donors, the Hoot, and landowners with the placement of cameras as well as financial support, a great group of interns and seasonals and volunteers. That's what made this happen. And then, of course, the partners were vital, including the state and federal agencies. So I want to stop there. This is the QR code. We'll keep it up so people can scan it. I found out from doing the survey for landowners that some people don't know what a QR code is yet, but that was already 1 year ago, and I'm sure now they're so ubiquitous, you can't avoid them. So, and my email is there. Welcome any comments of any kind, hopefully constructive, but I'll take the other kind too. So Max, I'll stop there and return, you know, throw it open to conversations and the like.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. That was really informative. I also added a link in the chat to the draft document, and there's also a link in there to the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group's website where there's more information about the study over the years. So if you don't want to scan the QR code, you can click the link in the chat window. And anyway, I'd love to open it up to anyone who has any questions. Feel free to come off mute and ask away or type it into the chat window, whichever you prefer.
I've answered everybody's concerns.
So I guess I'll just throw out a question, Whitney. I mean, we've done 4 years of study. We're probably going to take a pause. What do you think might, when might we do another numbers count again in the future? Is there going to be, do you have any plan? Are we going to take a break for a few years, a year?
Well, we're certainly going to take a break until machine learning catches up. So FWP and MSU are, I'm actively working with them because they want to do this sort of level of recreational use on other Southwest Montana rivers. We going out and collecting data without a really efficient way to analyze it just is not practical. So I do think this data will set a baseline where you can ask kind of what can you, so for instance, as FWP anticipates opening a new fish access site at mile 26, what level of use can they anticipate? We can answer that question. So if people want to know kind of how many people might be on a particular stretch and why, we can answer that question. So I think this data especially once it's in a spot where you can query it for specific responses, will last at least for another 5 years, or until something comes up that leads people to say what we know is insufficient. But it will ultimately come down to a question of values. Do we want more or less people? Do we want to make it easier for more people to get on the river? If we polled the people on this call, I'm sure that the answers, run the gamut from thank you, we don't need more people, to if I get a chance to be on the river, other people should get a chance.
Good, yeah. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I can jump to those. One is from Robert and Patrice Della Russo. Lots of information about how to add more capacity. What about reducing capacity or instituting a permit system to regulate use?
Well, it kind of goes, that's kind of been kind of what I started to address earlier. As you know from Yellowstone, looking at that question, Yellowstone National Park, as you look at what the Blackfoot has looked at, I guess my answer would be, how would you go about doing that and why? If it's to preserve your own personal use, because you're grumpy at it not being the old Montana, I guess I would say I'm not the person to ask that, to answer that. If we see, and I see that Freshwater Partners is on the phone, as if we see environmental degradation, which means that we're not taking care of the river. If we see reduction in fish per mile, if we see distinct things that we can link to recreation, then I would think that's when you start to worry about that. Wendy, did I get that right? Or Alicia?
Yeah, Alicia and I are on the call. I guess what was your question?
Well, so the question that was asked was, at what point might we consider permitting or limiting access and use?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's a question we're all still trying to understand. I think my question, and thanks for presenting this, Whitney, this is really good. And I think it's kind of a long question that we've been asking ourselves for a while, is who's going to take the lead and how are we going to get funding to implement a lot of the recommendations? So like ideas of an ambassador program or developing other education and outreach. I think we've had the challenge of, different orgs plugging in different ways, like the signage project that we're working on right now at different fishing access points. I think it might be worth maybe under the Fish Wildlife Rec group or other group within the watershed group of really discussing how we come up with a tangible action plan and who is going to do what, when, and how we're going to get funding, because I think it's being left up to different partners and people to kind of take on different parts, and it hasn't been coordinated, I think, in the fashion that it could be, like the Clark Fork Coalition or Flathead Rivers Alliance and other orgs doing a lot of these things in their watershed. So I think I did answer your question, because I don't know if we have a straight answer, but I do think it's really important for everyone on this call and folks interested in the watershed group really discuss how to move this stuff forward and not let it continue to build with conflict and pressures that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing. The study was not initiated in response to some regulatory consideration. So at this point, there's nothing on the table to actually permit or regulate use. And the study does help provide information on the level of use and where use becomes an obstacle or distraction to people's enjoyment. But at this point, there is no, desired condition where we would see the need to do a permitting or regulating until such time as that really comes up as a community concern or a biological concern. It's certainly not something we're advocating at this point. I hope that answered the question, and thank you, Wendy.
Yeah. That's a great point from both of you. It's, if and when that time comes, we want these decisions to be guided by the people by us, by the community, by the people who are on the river. We don't necessarily want it to be a reactionary measure, kind of top down. We want to work with FWP on the management of the river, and we want to inform it. And I think this data is able to help us do exactly that. So that's key. There's another question here from David Tucker asking, scrolling away from me, hang on a second. What was a surprise from the data that maybe did not line up with anecdotal observations?
That's a good question. I think, there were surprises on kind of how things like personal watercraft, the extent of kind of splash and giggle during August, some of the levels of commercial rafting use, because that's not really, been calibrated before. I think I think this picture that's on the last slide of the elk grazing as kayaks and commercial users go by kind of is indicative of the river. But one of the things that I didn't really relate was this study also tells us about non-use. So when you saw that heat map, you kind of zero in on the heat, but you also have periods of rest where the river is not being recreated on. So I think anecdotally, to understand these pulses of use and how they might impact both landowners and fish and all that was something that we didn't, when we started it, we didn't realize the kind of high level of data that we could collect and how that might be really used to answer questions. So that would be that. I do also see a question from Michael. Why was it cut off at Carter's Bridge? Originally, the study did go down to Mayers, but Mayers is really a town park as much as a fish access site, where dog walking was kind of the number one use. But the short answer, Michael, because of outfitters and guides and all asked that we consider going down to Springdale, is sheer exhaustion and limited resources. So 60 miles was a great deal of fun to deal with. But I do think, Max asked the question, when might we do this again? I would think we could move, especially if we got machine learning, that we should move to putting a baseline on the Mayers to Springdale, or for that matter, Carter's Bridge. We're not able to put a camera between Carter's Bridge and Mayers for the simple question that we couldn't find a site on the unbraided portion of the river where we could gain access. And I have not recognized that every single one of these cameras was on private land with the cooperation of the landowner. That was huge. It gave us easy access to the cameras. Cameras are largely secure. We were able to put them where they were most useful, but the landowners allowed us, access. And for instance, when FWP starts thinking about doing these on other rivers, they will not have that luxury. So anyway, I would think you've asked the right question, Michael. Should we start looking at calibrating the level of use downstream?
Great. There's one last question. I think we have a couple minutes left here, Whitney. If talking about RiverNet data, the quality of their data, how exactly is RiverNet data being used to help inform decisions on the Yellowstone and work with the Watershed Group? When we were discussing WRP planning, their data didn't meet the rigor required by Montana Department of Environmental Quality to be used to develop a watershed restoration plan. Has that changed so the data they're collecting can help the efforts of the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group?
Thankfully, I can't answer that because we were looking at the recreation. It is the right question to ask. RiverNet was established to really provide a citizen-based, volunteer-based database of how our water quality was. And I think, you know, I was part of the establishment of RiverNet, but have since not been part of it. So, and obviously MDEQ's water standards have bounced around. And we had argued that at least we could establish the rigor to collect the data under the old standards. But honestly, beyond that, we need to ensure we have that data, but I can't answer the specific, any more of the specifics of the question.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, it's 1 o'clock. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Whitney Tilt for the presentation and everyone for your questions. Please feel free to reach out to me after the fact if you have any questions that came up after this ends. But until next time, I hope you all have a great day. Thanks very much. Bye now.
Bye all.